I wanted to show everybody how to perform an intake manifold gasket replacement. I talk to a lot of people who have problems with the way a car is running, and you'd be surprised how many times a simple loose bolt or a gasket that wasn't quite perfect when something was installed causes a big problem on these cars. The first thing you need to do is basically remove all the little pieces that are going to the intake manifold, anything that's in the way, like your fuel injector, fuel line. Actually, in this on this specific intake manifold, you can remove the injectors and fuel rail in one shot. And then when you pop those up out of the way, make sure you have your vacuum lines and your PCV lines out of the way, and then join the Dave's World YouTube channel membership for perks at the YouTube channel and discounts at the Super Cruze's website for parts on your cars. You just have to remove the bolts that are on the intake manifold. The intake manifold bolts are an inverted Torx head bolt that you need an inverted Torx head socket to fit. It's called an E10 inverted Torx socket. So lean those out of the way, and then once you get the bolts off, you're going to remove the intake manifold bolts, and then you're going to remove the plug going to the throttle body, and then your intercooler pipe, and then you'll be able to remove the intake manifold right from the car. Quick note right here, underneath the intake manifold, you're going to see this little spot where a tiny line mounts to. This line controls your diverter, and basically if it leaks, you can get a vacuum or boost leak, also have your diverter not function properly, so make sure that line is taken care of whenever you're removing the intake manifold. You can see how loaded with oil this intake manifold is. Now in this situation, the oil was actually causing problems. Oil can actually deteriorate an intake manifold gasket, which is another reason why you need to replace gaskets on intake manifolds. Now with this car had a performance issue, which is why I was checking everything. And I actually came across the intake manifold itself being cracked and the gasket being an issue, and then in the next scene you'll see the throttle body gasket being a problem. When you have a bad intake manifold gasket or a throttle body gasket, you pretty much get the same symptoms. You get air-fuel ratio problems, idling issues, performance problems. You get your idle sometimes is really high, your idle sometimes is really low, and a bad gasket can cause this problem. Now if you look here, you can see that the gasket for the throttle body actually was not good anymore. What happened is it was so squished down, air was pretty much leaking past it, so I just siliconed this one because it was a spacer, and I put a brand new gasket on the intake manifold for the throttle body and the intake manifold itself before I reinstalled it in the car because it was also a brand new intake manifold. Okay, I cannot stress this enough. When you're putting an intake manifold back into a car, you have to make sure you work slow, drop it in place perfect, triple check the gasket has not shifted, and then slowly bolt everything down into a sequence. This is the torquing sequence you're going to have to follow. You start at the inner bolts on the bottom, then the inner bolts on the top. You're going to alternate across, and then you're going to work on the outer bolts, and you're going to bring them down all evenly and slowly, and then you'll finally torque them down after the sequence is done. After you tighten the bolts in the sequence, make sure you tighten each bolt on your last pass down to 15 foot-pounds. That way it brings the gasket down evenly, so you do not have any situation where the gasket may fall out, and then you tighten the intake manifold down, and then you have like a gasket situation where the gasket's sticking out, but you're sucking air in, which is a massive problem on any engine ever built in the history of engines.